Hello family, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into a crucial topic that affects millions of people worldwide, migrant workers in Arab countries. We'll be discussing 5 Arab countries you should avoid as a worker due to rampant racism, poor working conditions, and widespread exploitation under systems like the kafala system. Unfortunately, the stories of mistreatment, especially towards African and Asian workers, are all too common. This video will expose the harsh realities faced by many, including the lack of government support, the unbearable heat that leads to heat strokes, and the tragic deaths that often go unnoticed. Stay tuned as we uncover the dark side of working in these countries. Before we start, please hit the subscribe button to join the community. Starting at number 5, Oman might not be as frequently discussed as some of its neighbours, but it is certainly a country where migrant workers face significant challenges. The kafala system in Oman, similar to other Gulf countries, binds workers to their employers, often leading to severe exploitation. Migrant workers, particularly those from African and Asian countries, find themselves trapped in abusive situations with little to no recourse. Racism in Oman is pervasive, with migrant workers frequently experiencing discrimination and being relegated to the most menial and dangerous jobs. The social hierarchy places Omanis at the top, leaving migrant workers marginalized and often subjected to verbal and physical abuse. The working conditions in Oman are harsh, especially for those in the construction and domestic sectors. Long hours, poor pay, and unsafe working environments are common complaints. Domestic workers in particular are highly vulnerable, with many reporting cases of physical and sexual abuse by their employers. Despite the obvious need for reform, Oman has been slow to implement any meaningful changes, and the laws that do exist are rarely enforced. Workers attempting to escape abusive situations face significant legal and financial obstacles, trapping them in cycles of exploitation. Coming in at number 4 is Kuwait, a country where the kafala system has led to significant worker abuse, especially among domestic workers from Africa and Asia. In Kuwait, migrant workers are often subjected to extreme forms of exploitation, with many employers confiscating their passports, effectively trapping them in their jobs. This makes it nearly impossible for workers to leave or seek help, even when faced with abuse. Racism is deeply ingrained in Kuwaiti society, and African and Asian workers often face constant discrimination. They are treated as inferior, subjected to verbal and physical abuse, and have little to no rights or protections under Kuwaiti law. The living and working conditions for domestic workers in Kuwait are particularly dire. Many live in their employers' homes, where they are forced to work long hours for minimal pay and endure harsh treatment. Reports of workers being denied food, rest and basic health care are widespread. Despite numerous reports of abuse, the Kuwaiti government has done little to protect these vulnerable workers. Legal reforms are minimal and enforcement is weak, leaving workers with no recourse when their rights are violated. Attempts to seek help often result in deportation or further mistreatment, creating a sense of hopelessness among those trapped in abusive situations. Kuwait has also seen several high-profile cases of domestic workers dying under suspicious circumstances, drawing international attention to the dangers faced by migrant workers in the country. One of the most shocking cases was the death of 29-year-old Joanna de Marfilis, a Filipina domestic worker whose body was found in a freezer in her employer's home in 2018. Her tragic death highlighted the extreme dangers that domestic workers in Kuwait face, and it served as a grim reminder of the urgent need for reform in the treatment of migrant workers in the country. At number 3 is Qatar, a country that has been under intense international scrutiny due to its labour practices, especially in the lead-up to the 2022 FIFA World Cup. The kafala system in Qatar has led to widespread exploitation, particularly among workers from African and South Asian countries. Many migrant workers are lured to Qatar with the promise of good jobs, only to find themselves trapped in abusive situations with little hope of escape. Racism is rampant in Qatar, with African and Asian workers facing daily discrimination. They are often relegated to the lowest paying and most dangerous jobs, with little opportunity for advancement. The social hierarchy in Qatar places Arab nationals at the top, with migrant workers at the bottom, creating a system of institutionalized racism. The working conditions in Qatar are some of the worst in the region. Many workers are forced to live in overcrowded labor camps with inadequate sanitation and healthcare facilities. The construction sector, in particular, has been criticized for its lack of safety measures, leading to a high number of workplace injuries and deaths. Despite the obvious need for reform, Qatar has been slow to implement labor reforms, and those that have been introduced are often not enforced. Workers who attempt to leave abusive employers or seek better conditions often face legal and financial hurdles, making it nearly impossible to improve their situation. The death toll among migrant workers in Qatar has drawn international condemnation. Since the World Cup construction projects began, thousands of workers have died due to unsafe working conditions and heat exposure. In 2021, a report by The Guardian revealed that over 6,500 migrant workers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka had died in Qatar since the World Cup was awarded. These deaths are a tragic reminder of the human cost of Qatar's rapid development and its reliance on exploited migrant labour. At number 2 is the United Arab Emirates, UAE, a country often perceived as a land of opportunity due to its booming economy and luxurious lifestyle. However, for many migrant workers, the reality is far from glamorous. The kafala system is still prevalent in the UAE, leading to significant exploitation, particularly among African and Asian workers. Racism is a pervasive issue in the UAE, with workers from these regions often facing discrimination in both their professional and personal lives. They are frequently subjected to racial slurs and treated as second-class citizens with little regard for their well-being. The working conditions in the UAE are notoriously poor, especially for construction workers and domestic workers. Construction workers often work long hours in extreme heat, with minimal breaks and inadequate safety measures. The lack of labour rights for migrant workers means they have little protection against exploitation. Domestic workers are particularly vulnerable, with many reporting cases of physical and sexual abuse by their employers. Despite international pressure, the UAE government has been criticised for its lack of intervention in protecting migrant workers. Labour laws remain weak and enforcement is lax, leaving workers with little recourse when their rights are violated. Finally, at number 1 is Saudi Arabia, a country that attracts millions of migrant workers annually due to its wealth and economic opportunities. However, behind the glitz and glamour lies a harsh reality for many workers. The kafala system in Saudi Arabia often leads to severe exploitation, particularly among African and Asian workers. Workers are subjected to rampant racism, with many receiving lower wages and enduring verbal and physical abuse. The system makes it nearly impossible for workers to change jobs or leave the country without their employer's consent, trapping them in a cycle of exploitation. The working conditions in Saudi Arabia are notoriously poor, especially for domestic workers. Many are forced to work long hours with little rest and are provided with inadequate living conditions. Reports of employers confiscating passports and withholding wages are widespread, leaving workers with no recourse. The Saudi government provides little to no support for migrant workers, and complaints of abuse often go unaddressed. The power dynamics between employers and workers are heavily skewed, with workers having little to no bargaining power. The stories we've shared today are just a few examples of the harsh realities faced by migrant workers in these Arab countries. The kafala system, coupled with racism, poor working conditions, and a lack of government support, creates a perfect storm of exploitation and abuse. It's crucial for potential workers to be aware of these dangers before seeking employment in these countries. We hope that by shedding light on these issues, we can contribute to the push for meaningful reforms and better protections for all workers. If you found this video informative, please like, share and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth content on important global issues.